morning, Bishop Aldred.
Good morning, Dawn.
How are you?
I'm very well this morning. I've had my morning walk, my 2 mile walk, and I'm feeling pretty fit.
Okay, well, that's a lesson for us all. We should all be walking 2 miles at least every day. So well done. I think I
That's the
ought to be
advice I
doing,
got, and I'm trying to encourage others to do the
yeah,
same. Yeah.
I think I ought to be doing that too. That's really good. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Black Economics TV. We have with us Bishop Joe Aldred, very popular and well known within the Black church community in the UK. So, Bishop Aldred, tell me about your life. Tell me about the things that you are currently doing.
Well, about my life, I am Jamaican by birth. Came to England as a teenager to join father and mother and some siblings. Some of us went to America, some stayed in Jamaica, 11 of us, and I've lived here in England ever since. So I mean, now in my 73rd year, married with 3 daughters. My wife, Novelet, is a psychotherapist and a prison chaplain. And yeah, so that's kind of the broad life. What am I currently doing? I am retired. I retired officially from work in 2020. And I used to work for Churches Together in England as an Ecumenist, that is in interchurch relations. Of course, that kind of profession tend to have a long tail because of the breadth of connections. So since I've retired, I've continued to do some work and to be called upon to speak or write or what have you, in similar vein, whether it's Black church or broader church. One of the main things I'm connected with at the moment is the National Church Leaders Forum, the NCLF, that attempts to cohere and coordinate the voice of the Black church in the UK. I'm a trustee and a volunteer for the NCLF.
Okay, all right, lovely. Well, thank you for what you have been doing. How long have you been in the ministry? When did you actually start?
I think I had a bit of a runway experience, the plane taxi down the runway for quite a while before it actually takes off. Many people will be familiar with the way that in churches like Pentecostal churches particularly, you tend to be noticed, you emerge from that space as a leader. So long before I had any notion that I might be a minister, I was being asked by mothers and fathers, brothers and sisters in the church, to give an exhortation or, come to the prayer meeting and give a talk, that kind of thing. Or in terms of church, being asked to do things. I sang as well when I was younger, so I was also in that kind of ministry as a song leader and so on, soloists and in groups. So it's a kind of an emergence. Nobody in my family were ministers, and so I never saw that to be that. And it's in my local church in Aberdeen Street, the Church of God of Prophecy, Aberdeen Street in Birmingham, which some people might know. We're under Pastor McCullough, sadly now deceased. That emergence really came to fruition. And I still remember, it might have been about 19, I got married in 1974, so it might have been somewhere around about 73 or so, 1973, when I was still very young at the time, when Bishop McCullough came to see me and said to me that he is thinking of recommending to the local church that I be set forth as a trial minister.
Oh, wow.
That's how we got started. It was kind of a surprise to me because I didn't expect it, but it wasn't a surprise in that I was already, as I've said, being called upon to do things and to minister in different ways.
Well, you must have proved yourself to be quite a good speaker. and also the gift of music in terms of singing solo or in groups. You could have also been a gospel music star if you wanted to.
Yes, I guess I could. Sadly, I was never as impressed by my own singing as other people, as other people seem to have been of my singing, you know. So some of the London
That hasn't stopped some people, you know.
I know. But honestly, I've always been rather self-deprecating when it comes to my singing. So
Oh.
I could never quite understand what, it all started, the enthusiasm for my singing. It started the Sunday, my very first Sunday in England. So I was 15. Barefoot
Oh,
boy just come
wow.
to Barefoot boy just come to England. My mother, who grew me, my dad was here from I was a baby, so didn't know him. But our mom was the parent, in Jamaica. She'd just come to England before me, like the year before I came in 1968. So my first weekend, I think I came on a Friday. By Sunday, there was a program, right? Now everybody who know a Black church will know about the program, how you
Mm-hmm.
raise funds. There was going to be a program on the Sunday night. And my beloved mother simply said to me, Joseph, she never called me Joe, she always called me Joseph, which is my proper name. To Joseph, I'm putting up your name to sing in the program tonight. You never say no to mom. So, but where I'd come from in Jamaica, I was never known as a singer. You know, so why she had the idea that maybe she heard me singing in the yard or something, I don't know. And she put my name forward to sing, and they called my name, and I went up. The only song that I could sing, I thought I could sing, was 106 from the Banner Hymns, which is the Church of God of Prophecy hymnal at the
Okay.
time, the Banner Hymns. They since replaced it with the Hymns of Glorious Praise and so on. So I just went up, opened the Banner Hymns, turned to 106, because I'd heard that song sung when I was in Jamaica. And I sang it, all three verses and the chorus. And by the time I'd finished, of course, the musicians, all play by ear, don't they? So they just catch you and just go with it. By the time I'd finished, the church was in uproar. Encore, encore.
Wow.
Well, it blew me away.
Oh.
I said, yeah, I just arrived. I was not a singer in Jamaica, and suddenly here I was being lauded for my singing. And honestly, I can tell you, Dawn, that congregation encored me that night 3 times.
That's a
3
record.
times. Yeah, they couldn't get enough of this boy from Jamaica. You know,
Wow.
yeah, and that was how it started. So after that, I sort of sang. So yes, I think maybe if I had been a little bit more, if I'd taken a bit more pride in my own singing, maybe it could have gone that way. And I listen, I sang a lot. I was even on a record back then. A group
Ooh.
of us, yeah, went and I sang a couple of solos on an LP way back in the mid 70s. So I guess it could have been. So yes, it's a funny thing because even in becoming a minister in a Pentecostal church, my my predisposition is more quietist, more what I would call studied. So from the very beginning, when I was asked to do things like, can you come and give an exhortation? I would write it down, which was very anti and on Pentecostal at the time. But
Mm,
that was just my natural way of expressing myself. So
mm.
in a sense, I've always been a bit of a countercultural Pentecostal.
Okay.
Uh, and that continues to this day. How I've managed to have any kind of ministerial career being so on-Pentecostal in a Pentecostal setting, to this day, I'm not sure.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. So tell me about the churches that you went on to pastor. Was it one, two, 10? Tell me.
Well, let me tell you, 1983, by which time I was 31, um, I was asked to leave Birmingham and go to Kent, Ashford in Kent,
Oh, wow.
where Church of God Prophecy had a small congregation. So I was asked to go there to be pastor, but also to replace the district overseer, as the term was being used at the time. Change overseer to something else now. But so I was 1993, went down there, small church, stayed for a year. I requested to come back to Birmingham because it just did not feel like that was my destiny once
Okay.
I got there. So having moved my young family down there, we moved back to Birmingham. I spent a year as the national evangelist for the Church of God of Prophecy in the UK, which again wasn't strictly down my lane. And after a year of that, I was asked to go and to pastor a church in Oxford. I got to Oxford in 1985. I was there for 4 years. Felt we were just about, putting our roots down. And I was asked again by the Church of God Prophecy to go to Sheffield. And once again, going to Sheffield, I was made an overseer for the region, as well as a pastor of a church in Parkside at Duke Street. So I pastored there for about 7 years. So that's 1, 2, 3 churches that I've pastored in my time. Much, much later on, I was an associate pastor at Cannon Street Memorial Baptist Church in Handsworth, Birmingham, part of a team. But that was after I'd left pastoring in the Church of God of Prophecy and had branched out into the wider sort of ecumenical / academic world that I made a stunning move, I should confess.
I know. I'm actually surprised at that. It
I
sounds like
know.
you're a bit of a rebel. Ah, you
I
left the Church of God of Prophecy. That must have caused a scandal at the time.
Well, it was a neat move. It didn't actually involve leaving the Church of God of Prophecy.
Oh,
What it involved, this is 1996, after I'd been in Sheffield for 7 years. We had a pretty successful pastorate, but I developed an urge for a broader, non-denominational ministry. I quickly, well, I say quickly, over time, I became less enthusiastic about defending, dogmas, some of which I grew to disapprove of and disagree with.
oh, you were a rebel.
I think also what I should confess is that I returned to studying whilst I was in Sheffield, and I studied at the University of Sheffield through a unit called the Urban Theology Unit. And it was through study at master's level and then at PhD level, both of which I successfully defended. It was during those studies, I think, that I became more and more disquieted about some of the things as a bishop and as a pastor that I was being asked to defend. I just call them dogmas, right?
Understood. I understand.
And as the time went on, during my 7 years, particularly those 7 years in Sheffield, I began to look for a broader ministry. I didn't know what it might be, but I just knew that I didn't want to do that role of a local church pastor of a denomination with, support, defending some stuff that I don't agree with theologically. So I love the people, but I didn't so much love what was in my kit, my toolkit. So my very first departure was to apply for a job at a center in Birmingham called the Center for Black and White Christian Partnership. It was linked to the Celio colleges, for those who know Birmingham, and linked to the University of Birmingham through a certificate in theology program that I then had responsibility for, and that was run by the center before I got there. And the arrangement with the church, though, was that I would remain a bishop in the church, even though not a serving bishop, because I'd resigned from my roles as pastor and as district overseer. So, but I didn't leave the church. Many people thought I did. In fact, some people thought I'd backslidden, I'd left the faith to go to the
Okay.
Center for Black and White Christian Partnership. But it was a really inspirational move for me. And I could talk to you for a very long time about what that meant. But I feel that that was where my ministry would continue. And it did in ecumenical affairs. I moved from the Center for Black and White Christian Partnership to Churches Together in England and spent 18 years there. Okay. Until I left to go into retirement, during which time I wrote books. I did all kinds of various things to uplift my own community. And I remain in fellowship with the Church of God of Prophecy in all of that time until this day. So even my reference to co-pastoring in a Baptist church, that's whilst I was running the Center for Black and White Christian Partnership, or when I'd moved to CTE, right in that juncture. And my theology, my personal theology by then, meant that pastoring in a Baptist church was not a problem to me. And I was part of a team. It didn't work in the end because I think my wider work always kept getting in the way.
Yes.
I did it for 2 years. But I, again, like the churches I've pastored, as I've mentioned, in Kent, in Ashford, Kent, in Oxford, in Sheffield, and at Cannon Street Memorial Baptist Church in Handsworth, I have retained excellent and ongoing links with those churches and with individuals.
That's really good.
To this day.
Yeah, that's really good. I can remember another pastor taking a similar route, Pastor Joe Aldred, who was pastoring in Mile End Church in East London. And then he left to be part of a wider church organization.
Yeah, the Evangelical Alliance.
That's right. Yes. And we were all surprised and shocked because, I was very much involved with the church at that time.
Joel is a personal friend. Obviously, we mourn his loss, but he was a personal friend of mine. And during those years, he and I often met. We met at least twice a year for dinner or lunch.
Oh, wow.
To chew the cud. There were one or two other people who were in similar dislocations like Joel and I was from our denominations.
Yeah.
So sometimes there was up to maybe half a dozen of us who would meet on those, twice yearly lunch or dinners to chew the cud over how life is when you are in that space where you kind of belong to a denomination, but your vocation is not within it. And some of the misconceptions and presumptions and whatever. Let me just throw this in. Some years later, a few years ago, a gentleman who's again now deceased, he said he wanted to see me. So I went to his house. And the first thing he said after I got there, this is a minister of the Church of God of Prophecy, right? My denomination. So he said, firstly, he said, I'm surprised that you've come. So I said, so why are you surprised? He said, I just didn't think you would come, So when we sat down, anyway, what he wanted to tell me, he said, I want to apologize to you, Joe. He said, when you left your ministry in Sheffield as a pastor and district overseer, when you resigned, I was one of the people who cursed you out. Yeah. He said, but having read your latest book, in which I talk about that experience of, moving on to something else, which was quite unprecedented. So I actually don't blame anybody for the views that the position they took up with regard to it. Anyway, this dearly beloved brother said to me, he said, having read your book, I now understand what you were doing. And I apologize for anything that I may have said. I never heard that he said anything. Yeah. And in fact, I've since learned that he was one of those people who used to defend me against, the cussing out of other people who didn't understand. But
it's amazing what cussing out goes on in church, isn't it?
A lot. I mean, I think if you behave anything off the main beaten track,
yeah.
Right? And I guess Joel and I found a kind of a soulmate response to each other. He was much brighter than me, so I was always looking up to Joel, right?
Oh.
No, seriously. But we found that resonance in terms of how easy it is to be misunderstood by those who do not know why you do what you do. And it's made me, anyway, well, it makes me attempt to be tolerant of others that I don't understand.
Yes, yes. So who left their ministry first? Was it you or was it Pastor Joel Edwards?
That's a very good question. I think Joel.
Oh, really?
I
Oh,
think Joel, because if you remember, Joel first, I mean, Joel was New Testament Church of God, right? But Joel first went to ACEA, the African and Caribbean Evangelical Alliance, right?
yes.
So he'd moved to work for ACEA, and by the time of 1996, when I went to the Center for Black and White Christian Partnership, Joel was already at the ACEA.
Okay.
He then went on he moved up to the Evangelical Alliance proper
Yes. Yeah.
after serving a few terms at ACEA. So yes, he would have made the step, but we didn't know each other at the time.
Okay, okay. Oh,
Mm.
well, that's very interesting. What is the book you just mentioned?
Well, I've published 10 books in my
Oh,
time.
right. Let's get on to the books then.
Since since I moved on from my denominational ministry work in 1996 to the center into what I said is intercultural ecumenism, I call it. It's also touch one foot in academia with the University of Birmingham. One of the very first impressions that I had, first drivers for me, was the lack of literary resources by our people, for
Yes.
our people.
Thank you.
So here I was in charge of a certificate in theology program, accredited by the University of Birmingham, run by the Center for Black and White Christian Partnership, for which I was now the director from 96. And when you asked students to write essays, there were references to books coming out of America or from white mainstream. Practically nothing by people like you or me about our situation here in the UK and the world. So my very first books was an attempt to address that. And so in 1998, I published Preaching with Power, 20 sermons by Black pastors.
Ooh.
Yeah. And that was quickly followed by two other anthologies, Praying with Power and Sisters with Power.
Oh.
Those were published in 2000.
Mm-hmm.
In those three books, you had sort of 20 pastors writing in the first one, about the same again in Sisters with Power, and about the same again in Praying with Power. So you had three collections of writings by Black leaders. There may have been one or two deviations from that, but mostly they were Black leaders in the UK who wrote and filled those books. People will know. Let me not even attempt to go into the names now. So that was three. I suggest to women particularly get hold of Sisters with Power, because it's a powerful collection of essays by women,
Fantastic.
some of whom have now become well known, but may not
Oh.
have been at the time when they wrote. And the same for the other two, Preaching with Power and Praying with Power, which was not gender specific. But as I said, the people writing in them are people that people will know about. And those books were very popular at the time. I went to the Caribbean and I went to the University of the West Indies. And I remember seeing two of those books, especially Sister with Power, in the library. It was
Oh,
marked practically every line in that book had pencil
wow.
marks and pen and highlighters. And so, and after that, I published another anthology um, called The Black Church in the 21st Century. Don't ask me what year that was now, but that was after the three anthologies. So my first four books, if you like, were anthologies. I didn't write in the first three at all, apart from the introduction to those books. But I wrote some chapters, a couple of chapters in The Black Church in the 21st Century, all published by mainstream publishers as well, and they're probably still available online from Amazon and others. So that's four, right? I then published a study which I edited. The other four books were edited as well. My fifth edited work was Who is My Neighbor? A church response to guns, gangs, drugs, and something else.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so that's out there as well. Privately published. That one was by Churches Together in England. And then I think the next book I published was my PhD thesis, which is titled Respect: Understanding Caribbean British Christianity, which was the subject of my PhD. And I picked up this theory, this theme of respect, from its Latin derivation of respectio, re meaning back, or again, specio meaning spectacles, right? So respect in that sense was about looking back, looking again. In other words, if I want to get to know Dawn, I will need to spend some time with Dawn, getting to understand Dawn. Now, in my lexicon of respect, that is respect, that I actually take the time to get to know who Dawn is. Whether I like Dawn or not is another matter altogether, but at least I
Yeah.
know who it is that I'm dealing with. And I was encouraging people to get to understand, get close to and understand the Black churches before they started critiquing it, right? Respect that Black church before. That was my thesis. So that was the book, Respect, Understanding British Caribbean British Christianity. So that's what, up to about I don't know, 6 or 7 books, and after that I published my anthology, not my anthology, my autobiography, titled From Top Mountain. Again, that's still out there. And then I published another book called, what was this one called now? Another, that was, hang on, yeah, Thinking Outside the Box. That's right. Thinking Outside the Box, on race, faith, and life. And that must be about 9. And most recently, I have published this here book, Flourishing in Babylon, if you can see it. So Flourishing in Babylon is my very latest book. Black British Agency and Self-Determination is a subtext of that. So the book that I referred to earlier, I think that's 10. Oh yeah, I've missed one of it actually. Just before I retired in 2020, I published a book on Pentecostals and Charismatics in Britain, which again was an edited book that I did.
With Justin Welby, I see. With Justin
Yes,
Welby.
indeed. You're Googling as we're talking, right?
Yeah.
So Justin Welby wrote the foreword to that book.
Okay.
He wrote the foreword.
And who is Justin Welby, in case people don't know?
Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Yes.
With whom in my work at Churches Together in England in ecumenical affairs, my role involved me working alongside the leaders of national churches. So Justin Welby would be the leader for the Church of England and the Anglicans. And then the other bishops and archbishops, including our own churches like the Church of God of Prophecy, New Testament Church of God, Redeemed Christian Church of God, the Methodist, the Baptist. And so I worked reasonably closely with all of them. So we asked Justin if he would kindly write the foreword to Pentecostals and Charismatics in Britain.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah,
Well,
there's quite a corpus there, quite a footprint.
yeah, you're a prolific writer to have
And,
produced
and of
10 books.
and of course, that's not to mention the many articles that one then writes along the way, of which, again,
Yes.
there are many articles. Some of them are online. Some have been published in periodicals like Keep the Faith. I write regularly for The Preacher, which is a magazine that goes out to preachers around the country. So I
Great.
write there. And of course, I write the scripts for things like Pause for Thought on BBC Radio, the daily service, which I've just finished a script. There's a service, I'll be doing the daily service on the 19th of November, and then again in December. So you write through all of those things. And no, I've loved the life I've lived for the last 30 years since I broke ranks and moved away from sort of denominational thinking to a broader
Yeah,
church
yeah.
kingdom thing.
Well done. Well done. There was you were thinking outside the box. There were
Yes.
certain things you had to do, which perhaps you were controlled and
Constrained.
constrained and not allowed the freedom to really do what you needed to do. So I'm
Well, you
thankful
see,
for your journey.
I'm, people talk to me sometimes and they say, like, so because I don't have a closely tied in journey with my denomination, some people assume that that must be problematic. And sometimes it is, because actually I end up feeling, I don't really have a denominational home. So even though I belong to it, because I don't work in it,
Yeah.
there's distance there. There's
Yeah.
distance there. But that distance is a very creative distance. I still attend a local Church of God Prophecy congregation. I don't play any part. I just attend.
Yes.
I want to swim in the wider ocean, right?
Yes.
If I give you a quick sense of the areas that I have difficulty with, why I prefer to remain part of it. I remain part of the church I'm in for historic reasons. That's the church I was born into, and I was in Jamaica, and that's the church I came to England and reconnected with. Some of the same people, by the way, who migrated to England, from our district. And it's a church where I'm telling you, they were anchoring me and sing. So it's a space that has affirmed me, significantly.
Yeah.
Some of the church mothers who would tell you every now and then with a conk in the head, we're praying for you. Behave yourself. So you are both encouraged, you are rebuked, you're prayed for, and Brother Joseph, how are you getting on? So I stay because of that reason, right? One reason that would make me not stay is that the Church of God of Prophecy has its roots too much deeply embedded from its start in the deep south of the United States. And there are times that I am embarrassed as a Rasta, a bar-led Rasta and Pan-Africanist, an African man, that the church that I belong to has its roots in where the KKK comes from, and it's still rooted there. And sometimes you're
Does that
reminded.
mean it still has very conservative values?
It does, yes, it does, and so do I. I say to folks, listen, I am a product of my environment, right? So, in as much as I have studied widely, I would still regard myself as a conservative Christian. So, one of the things it means that I don't run with, everybody's little drama. I'm not coming with you. I sit on my own bottom here, right? My mother used to say every pot must have its own bottom, right? I sit on my own bottom in this. And so whether it's whenever, let me not call any names to give the game away, but when I'm journeying through life, I'm not journeying through it joining herds, right? I'm the ultimate unherded person. I'm not following you down no rabbit hole. No, sir. I am charting a course, and that's what I do for my denomination. I'm saying I'm not following you on these things. So I was saying I was going to give you two examples. Pentecostal churches generally teach, well, they teach a variety of things about the Holy Spirit. But I have lived through a lifetime of seeing some of the downsides of teachings about the Holy Spirit. So, for example, when a church teaches that a person must be saved, sanctified, and filled with the Holy Ghost, where what it means to be sanctified is completely indeterminate. Nobody doesn't know what it means. And to the extent you know what it means, you know say nothing don't gossa. Like, for example, that sanctification eradicates the Adamic nature, right? I don't know nobody living on this planet who don't have no inclination to do something wrong, which is what is implied by the eradication of the Adamic nature. So that's just, I can't support that. And then it goes on to say, the third bit of the salvific process is that you must be filled with the Holy Ghost, and the evidence of that is that you speak in tongues. Now, I have known so many people in church who have, in spite of all the hullabaloo about speaking in tongues, who never evidenced tongue speaking. And some of those people have lived into advanced age and then die with the church that they're in telling them that they have not reached the ultimate aim of having the indwelling of the Holy Spirit because they never spoke in tongues. I've seen how that undermines people's faith, keeps them coming back to the altar every week. And then when you see some of the people running around speaking in tongues, who you know certain things about, that you would say, you really believe that the Holy Spirit is working there? But of course, Spirit works where the Spirit wills. So that's something, for example, which is a cardinal teaching of my own denomination. I just cannot support that teaching. That I don't support its view of what sanctification is, and I don't support the view that the Almighty God, who Trinitarians believe is expressed in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, indivisibly one. I do not believe I can support a teaching that says somehow you got saved, Jesus comes into your heart, but somehow you don't have the Holy Spirit. The Spirit is not. What do you mean the Spirit? You mean the Spirit is separated from Jesus? I mean, what's going on here? You either have God or you don't have God, right? God is either in you or God is not in you. If God is in you, he's in there, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So that's one teaching I find very difficult to do. Well, not difficult. I just can't defend. I more see the Holy Spirit like in more germane terms, like, a seed that is planted into the ground has the DNA of what that tree is going to be. So I believe that when a new birth takes place, that person who has been born again is then going to grow, but you have from the very start the presence of God in your life. And that's God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Now, it may well be that as you grow up and you start to bear fruit, tongues, speaking in tongues and interpretation of tongues may be a fruit that you grow. But it's not a fruit that tells you whether or not the Holy Spirit is in you or not. Is my point. That's to put the cart before the horse. But the other thing that I know I've gotten into trouble for several times is that I happen to believe, and I don't ask anybody to agree with me, but I happen to believe that something like tithing, for example, is an Old Testament teaching. That is not a New Testament principle. The New Testament principle is giving. You give to meet needs, and you can do abundant giving. But tithing, which we just conveniently pluck out of the Old Testament and bring it into the New Testament era, we don't want to take the Sabbath day, though, to remember to keep it holy, like that Seventh-day Adventists do. But we want to keep tithing because it's the cash cow. So that's another teaching, which again, I would encourage people to look into more closely, because once you start to pay tithes, it's a bit like paying the tax man. You lack generosity because you paid your tithe. What more do you want from me, right? Pay the tithes already. So even in my pastoring over the years, I have encouraged people to give, right? I don't tell them don't tithe, but if you want to tithe, that's what you, but I'm telling you, giving is what brings a blessing, not not paying as if you are doing something. So those are a couple of reasons why I find it much better for me to live in that creative space that develops between me and what I do and my denomination and other denominations like that.
I've got to say, Bishop Aldred, you seem quite radical. You're
Well,
different.
if I go back to my friend Joel, and I'm not even suggesting that Joel and I would agree on these matters, but I think what we have in common is a desire to keep looking, to keep searching, to keep asking questions, and most of all, a desire to enable Christians to grow in their faith, to remain questioning, because that's the way you grow, and not simply to accept a set of dogmas, which may be necessary in your early stage of life, like children, a child being born, and they depend on certain dogmatic things that the parents will do for them. But as you grow, as you leave home, you have to now decide how are you going to live with integrity, and in knowledge and in a relationship with God, which is not mediated through a set of dogmas from your church, but which grows out of a personal relationship. Community is still important. And as I said, I continue to fellowship in a local church. And because I know I'm out of alignment with some of what is thought to be, well, I don't push that on folks. If they talk to me, they'll certainly hear my views, as you do now. Radical? Maybe.
Okay. I've considered the Black church to be like a sleeping giant, very full of very able people, bright, intelligent, a lot of entrepreneurs in there, a lot of professionals. The Black church is probably more dominated by the African centered church from the Africans who have come over from the continent. So now they're surpassed in numbers the Caribbean churches, which kind of makes sense. And there's some of the churches that have a mix of African and Caribbean. But in terms of the power of the Black church, do you think it's still as strong as it used to be, or is it not? Because I really do think it's a sleeping giant. And I'm wondering who's going to awaken it so that the whole of England knows that we still exist,
Yes. Well, the National Church Leaders Forum that I mentioned has been trying to address this question of the sleeping giant and how it can become more visible and be more greatly felt. One of the weaknesses that militates against it being seen and felt in a large way, not just an individual church, is its diversity. We call it the Black church in the singular. It really is the Black churches. I didn't mention this in my list of books, but I published a directory of Black majority churches.
Oh, did you?
From around about 2000. We published it in hard copy, got some money from the Church Urban Fund for the first publication that we did. And we republished maybe 3 times. But as IT became more the way we live, we moved it online. And after a while, it fizzled out because most churches now have their stuff online, right? So, if you want to know how many churches the Church of God Prophecy has, that's almost certainly on their website. So in the end, and because of GDPR, we, maintaining correct information and so on, we closed it. However, if you go back to when it was hard copy, I estimate that there were some 300 differently named Black church denomination in the country. Really? Yeah. And if you add into that the number of independent local churches that wouldn't qualify as a denomination necessarily because there may be one congregation or two, that number would double, right? So you're talking about at least 500, I would say, differently named, local or bigger churches in the UK that are denominations.
Okay. And how many churches?
Well,
and how many churches?
We estimate there was about 500 national churches, 5,000 local churches. That was our rule of thumb, right? Quite unscientific, but that's because there was these churches, they're springing up all the time and they're closing all the time. So it was difficult to say. But I'm just saying that variety, which is rich, also means that it's very difficult to cohere them, because there is no synodical approach to this. There's nowhere where they meet in synod, once a year or every 2 years, whatever. So they can compare notes and agree. Some of them are Trinitarian, some are Oneness Pentecostal, some are Seventh-day Pentecostal. It's a whole lot. New Testament Church of God, for example, and Church of God Prophecy are very similar churches. They came from the same root until 1922 when they split. All right, but they are very different churches here. They do not sit as one, right? And then if you look at the largest African church probably is the RCCG, the Redeemed Christian Church of God. They've probably got 1,000 congregations across the country now. And there are several other mega churches. There are lots of Black Christians who are in mainstream churches, the Anglicans, the Methodists, the Baptists, and so on. So the Black Christian movement in the country is hugely diverse. That is the main reason I can tell you, Dawn, why it is very difficult to speak of the Black church as a sleeping giant, because it is not a giant. It is several, like Oliver in the Land of Little People or whatever it was called. It is several churches, large and small. The Church of God Prophecy that I belong to, the New Testament Church of God sister church, Church of God Prophecy has never had 10,000 members in the country. Never.
Wow.
The New Testament Church of God talk about 12,000 and 30,000 following. So however you cut that, those are still pretty small churches, right, in the country.
Yeah.
And if you go play something like KICC with Matthew Ashmalowa, I mean, Matthew is probably boasting, I don't know, 10 to 15,000 members, for his churches in the country. So that's probably bigger than even, say, a Church of God Prophecy, which has the identity of a national church with nearly 100 congregations, but they're all pretty small. So it is something like, I think you have to look at two things quickly. One is the work of something like the NCLF, the National Church Leaders Movement, and I encourage people to Google it. You'll find our website online. We try, and from time to time, we speak with a coordinated voice on certain issues of the time. We've published a manifesto twice, and there is a current manifesto now that's available in hard copy as well as online, which I encourage people to have.
Could you tell us what NCLF is?
The National Church Leaders Forum.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm saying that's one way you can see us as a group, right? But it's not at all perfect because you're trying to cohere a huge diversity. We have a quarterly newsletter as well, which people can sign up to and again get some news from across the plane. You have, of course, Marcia Dixon's Keep the Faith magazine. It used to be run by Shirley McGreal, which again gives you a bit of a corpus of this broader entity. And then if you look at individual churches and what they're doing, you get a picture too of how the giant is not so sleeping.
Okay.
Just the other day, for example, the Pentecostal Credit Union became the Pentecostal Community Bank.
Yes.
That's a huge achievement.
It is.
And it continues, and it's going from strength to strength. I've been a big supporter, still am a big supporter of it. Elaine and her colleagues there, and Sean, are doing a fantastic work. If you look closely at, say, the Church of God Prophecy, one of our big achievements, apart from some splendid buildings across the country, Aberdeen Street, Winston Green, where I grew up, is a case in point. there is the Nehemiah Housing Association, which provides housing for a huge amount of people, not
Is that still
church.
going?
Absolutely, it is still.
Oh, wow.
It has merged with at least one, if not two, other housing associations, but it's still under the name of the Nehemiah Housing Association. Bishop Llewellyn Graham is still, I believe, the chief executive of that. That's a massive thing. And one more I'll name for you, which is an educational project that is called Black Boys Can, that also launched a school, the first Black-run school in the country, I think, certainly from the Black churches sector, called the King Solomon International Business School. Now, it has just been taken over by another trust, so it isn't run any longer by the people who started it. But the King Solomon International Business School is still a project that morphed out of the Black churches.
Okay.
So, as I said, if you add it all up, and if we call it one, the Black church in the UK, it isn't so sleepy. Believe me, there's a lot going on, but of course, to get into mainstream news, if you read Matt Marcia's monthly or bi-monthly magazine, Keep the Faith, you see a lot going on in there by said Black church. So yeah, I would encourage people to get, as my book Respect suggests, look again.
Yes.
Look again. And what you will see is that, in fact, this church, the Black church, very diverse, punches its weight in many, many respects.
Okay. All right. But it sounds like, therefore, we should probably delve deeper.
Yes.
And see
I do think. Yeah.
Some of those projects or businesses that are being run by Black churches, which are making an impact in their communities and perhaps a wider country.
They most certainly do. But because, as I said, because it's a spread, because it is not one church, but many, that tends to diffuse its perceived impact. But to the people benefiting, two of my siblings live in a Nehemiah house, not together, separate. They live in Nehemiah housing accommodations.
Okay.
And there are many people around who benefit from that. One of the areas that people look at when they say the Black church is a sleeping giant is a political arena. And there have been one or two theologians close to us who have made that kind of their work to point out how lacking the Black church is in terms of political oomph, right? And I plead partly guilty to that charge, in that the Black churches have not tended to be strategically political, as in, become national politicians and so on. But there are very good reasons for that. When those churches started, they were more about survival and looking after their members than they were about storming Parliament, right? But individuals, many of the people now in Parliament who are Black are Christians. Yeah. And if you cut back, you'll see many of their paths lead you back to a Black church somewhere that has influenced them and their lives. It's just that the Black churches themselves have not parachuted people from them straight, sponsored by them, into Parliament. And maybe the time will come for that. But personally on it, just finally, I'm actually a believer that the Black church should not be party political.
Okay, fair enough.
I think it should allow for the diversity of views and aspirations. And so if Black people want to join the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party or the Labour Party or the Greens, as they do, then we should absolutely encourage political involvement where people feel most called to. So I don't think the Black church should put up a Labour candidate. You know what I mean? I think if people want to come up, stand up for Labour, then we should encourage them. If they want to stand up for the Conservative, we should also encourage them, and that's what I do. Maybe I should say one last thing. When these churches started, Dawn, back in the 50s and 60s, many writers, theologian, historians, clergy people viewed us as not churches, but sects. sects. That's how we were viewed initially.
Yes.
We were not proper church. I can tell you, as is indicated by my book, Pentecostals and Charismatics in Britain, being forwarded by the Archbishop of Canterbury, I can tell you we are not viewed in that way now as saints. And that's largely because we have remained steadfast. I am a product of that Black church space. And many of us have moved on, like Joel, whom we've talked about, to perform heroics in mainstream society. And now, I mean, I've, walked the corridors of Parliament, the corridors of the Archbishop's Palace at Lambeth, other places around the country where I, as a representative from the Black churches, have been invited into and taken part in various stuff. So, asking the Archbishop to write the forward for Pentecostal and Charismatics was the most natural thing to do because we have very strong relationships, working relationships. So, as I said, I think people need to look again when they think about the Black churches. Remember the diversity and remember that there is no synodical approach to it. The closest you come to that is through the NCLF, and that's not a particularly strong voice, but it is attempting to put a voice. But if you really want to find out about these churches, you really have to zero in on the New Testament Church of God in Northampton, the Church of God of Prophecy in Great Barr in Birmingham, RCCG down just outside London.
Yes.
You'll find that each of those churches and a myriad of others have got fantastic programs running, social programs, spiritual programs, training programs, empowering people to stand up in the world and to be the best that they can be in the image of God.
Well, I tell you, something that has come out of the Black church, and that's here as well as in America, is a lot of Black musicians.
Indeed.
Because the church proved to be a training ground for some of those singers as well as instrumental players. And we could name some of them, like Beverly Knight, Mika Paris.
We certainly could. We certainly could. And when you look at a number of pop groups now, and that's of course been a major controversy, or it has caused controversies in churches. When you look at a number of groups that you see on TV, if you look at who the musicians are and the backing singers are,
absolutely,
very often those are people that I would recognize.
Sometimes I'm checking to see who I know on there.
Indeed. The Kingdom Choir that sang at the wedding of Prince and
Harry and Meghan.
Harry and Meghan,
absolutely,
is the tip of a huge iceberg in terms of gospel. Look how gospel has exploded on our TVs, for example, in recent times. You have all white gospel choirs now.
Yeah, exactly.
As well as a lot of mixed ones, a lot of all Black ones, and so on. So no doubt the music scene has been impacted. You have people like Stormzy singing gospel, and
it's not seen as such a strange thing anymore.
No. At least you don't swear. You don't swear on those ones.
Exactly. or say the N-word.
Indeed, but the music is an area where the Black churches have made, and in churches as well, because I came to England in 1968, as I mentioned. If you walked into almost any Anglican church, even the ones that are made up of students, like the student churches you have in most cities, Anglican churches, the music that they were doing was not terribly exciting. The singing that was going on was not very exciting.
Yeah.
But the Black churches came in the 50s and 60s, and look at the way in which it's like a leavening the whole lump, right? We've seen the reverb of that musicality into almost every church that there is in the land, you'll find that there is more vigor, more energy, more imagination.
Well, thank goodness for that, eh?
Thank goodness for that, because of course our people are there. As I said before,
Yes.
the Black Christianity, the Black Christian movement cuts across all denominations. So we are taking our sense of energy and liveliness, with meditative tendencies as well for many of us, into those spaces.
And I think
there's no question we've been very effective.
yeah, and I think one of the musicians we should mention is Fritz McIntyre, who was the son of Pastor McIntyre. He used to be a bishop within the New Testament
New Testament church.
Now, Fritz McIntyre was in Simply Red, and he was
no, I didn't know that.
responsible for, he was a lead keyboard player. He wrote a lot of songs. He was in the group for about 9 years from their inception. I mean,
I didn't know that.
Sadly, he's no longer with us, but he was quite instrumental in the strength of Simply Red. Mick Hucknall will know all about that.
Yes,
I mentioned. And when Fritz died 3 years ago, he was talked about on the Italian news. So across Europe he was known. I mean, not so much over here, although they did know Simply Red. They just knew them as a group and the frontman Mick Hucknall, but he was hugely instrumental in the music industry.
Yeah, and as I said, that cross-pollination has caused some controversy. I remember when I mentioned my time in Sheffield as a pastor. What's that soul singer Bolton? What's his first name? I can't remember.
Michael
Bolton. Michael Bolton came to Sheffield whilst I was a pastor there. And we had a choir and we had good singers and good musicians. And somehow his people found our young people. And Michael Bolton, not him directly necessarily, but let's say him, because he was a singer. He invited some of a couple of our young women, and I think a couple of the young men as well, to sing and to play. He was having a big concert. And I remember when that was put to me as the pastor, right? Now we're talking about the 90s, right? So it's a while ago.
Controversy.
It was frowned upon by practically everybody. But being the pastor that I was trying to be, I gave it the nod. I absolutely gave it.
Good for you.
Yeah. And they sang, and they got, for all of them, it was the first time that they had sung and been paid.
Oh,
absolutely. But then you have to also have a holistic view of the world. There are some Christians, and this is one of my criticisms of our gospel singers in this country, generally speaking, that some people have the view that a Christian should sing no song that doesn't have Jesus, I love you in it, right? And this narrowing of the view, it's all about the Lord. It's not all about the Lord. It's about you. It's about life as well.
Yeah.
So for some reason, I've not had that as a challenge. That of course, what you sing about, you do have to bear in mind how consistent is that with my Christian values, right? But that should not cut you off from singing songs that don't have Jesus, I love you in it.
Yes, indeed. Well, I think things have changed now. People
they have. Not altogether, though. I'm telling you, there are some people who still draw the line. Folks have always been sometimes worried about me and my spirituality level, which maybe they have good cause to do.
We'll have to pray for you.
If they, when I for many years now, I've got a memory stick. Since you've been able to have memory sticks in cars, I got a memory stick which has a heap of hours of music on it, right? But it is absolutely eclectic. So
you mean it's not all gospel?
It's not all gospel. Ooh! And so depending on which album is playing when people come into my car, they're looking, saying,
side eye.
Really? But
Oh,
no, man, listen, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. We shouldn't divorce ourselves from the beauty of art, what you get out of songs and music by just saying the only songs you can sing are the songs that say Jesus, I love you, or something like that. You sing those as well, but you must sing songs about life and love and the rest of it as well.
yeah. I do remember being in I mean, we're going back many years now, but being in a department store and hearing this beautiful song come over the tannoy, Sailing by Christopher Cross. I remember
Mm,
thinking, wow, this song is amazing. And it's not even gospel, because at the time I was still in that mode of, oh, you should only listen to gospel.
yeah,
And then from
yeah,
then I decided, you know what, I need to broaden my outlook, because
yeah.
there's some beautiful songs out there which aren't going to kill me, just will enrich my life.
Well, I tell you, my wife and I were on holiday. I think it was the Isle of Man, one of the Channel Isles anyway. And we were sitting in the restaurant area one day. I think it was restaurant or the lounge area. And it was quiet. But the music was playing. And then suddenly it came on, you know, heavy is the hair that wears the crown. And of course, there he was. To me, that kind of a moment when you hear that kind of sound, which represents a broadening of what you might call gospel,
Mm.
um, and to realize that it has now percolated into society at large,
Yes, it has. It
right?
has.
That's what Jesus came to do. Jesus said that he's come to shine a light in the world.
Mm.
And we can't just have songs that you just sing in church. And even those songs in church should have a breadth to them that reflects our life in the world.
Absolutely.
So good,
Absolutely.
big up Stormzy for that.
Okay. I'll send him your words.
Heavy is the head that wears the crown.
And speaking of singers getting in trouble, I remember a group of singers from our church getting in trouble because they were asked to do a backing uh, vocalist session on Top of the Pops with Coolio in
Yeah,
Gangsters Paradise. Oh my God. It
I
was
know.
a scandal. They had to stand up and apologize at the front of the church. I was like,
I
what?
know. I know. Repent.
Thank goodness those days are over.
And well, they're over, but I would say there is still the need to have, without those kind of crude curtailment of people's ability to involve themselves in the world, there is still a need to have a sense of good and bad, of right and wrong, and a sense of what uplifts,
Yes,
what
what uplifts and what
degrades,
doesn't. Absolutely.
what puts us down as opposed to what lifts us up.
Yeah, because not
So
every
but we should allow artists the freedom to be able to explore those
yeah.
rather than somebody somewhere putting, from high up deciding you will not. I remember one national bishop some time ago when men started to put studs in their ear.
Mm.
Um, I remember when that started, and the national bishop, in one of his sternest rebukes, he said, "I will not tolerate that." Right? That was what he said. You know what happened afterwards? There was a proliferation of men with studs in their ear.
Really?
Absolutely. It's like
Wow.
you are not going to tell us how we dress. So I think top-down instructions and so on don't help. We must encourage people to grow in their understanding of what it means to be a Christian in the world,
Mm.
and also allow for the mistakes that may be made from time to time. But you have to do that in order that people can grow. It's a bit like a child growing up. When they start to walk, they buck the toe, fall down, whatever. You pick them up again and they go and they become better walkers, right?
Mm.
Well, so it is with us in life.
I don't think the young people now understand the kind of rules and regulations we had to go through when we were younger, especially as women, not allowed to wear trousers. You
I
had to have
know.
your arms covered, yeah, no arm sleeves as it was called. You couldn't wear jewelry. You couldn't have hair extensions. You had to
Hmm.
wear a hat to church all the time. Your skirt had to be below the knee. There's so many rules and regulations. You weren't
They were in
allowed to.
songs as well. I
Yeah.
remember singing, "You can't go to heaven in a high heel shoes,
Oh,
for the Lord don't want no highness there."
somebody actually wrote that song and people were singing it.
Yes, it
Oh
used
my
to be sung
goodness.
in the early days. It used to be sung in church.
And then you weren't allowed to go to parties,
Weren't allowed to go to the cinema. You
clubs,
weren't allowed.
cinema. Oh my
Yeah. Yeah,
goodness.
yeah. And but those things were enshrined. Some people say, well, it's the black church, but those things did not come from the black churches. Those things came, if you follow the Methodist tradition, for example, the Methodists and the whole temperance society that ruled over, I don't know, Victorian England or whatever time it was, is what percolated into some of these teachings. So my church, Church of God Prophecy, and the New Testament Church of God, coming out of the Deep South, as I've said, in Cleveland, Tennessee, in the US, the people who started them came from Methodists and Baptists and Quakers, and they
Yeah.
brought those teachings in. So I grew up. One of the advice to members that the Church of God Prophecy has, and I don't doubt the New Testament Church of God must have had it at some point, if they don't still, is about women's clothes. And if you were going to be taken in as a member into the church, you would hear it read to you, in
Mhm.
addition to the things about moving theater, moving pictures, and so on. But it went something like that: the women's clothes must be neat and clean, but not for show.
Mhm. Mhm.
High enough neckline,
Oh my
low,
goodness.
low enough, low enough hemline,
Mhm.
and sleeves of reasonable length.
Mm.
And if you turn up in church with any no sleeve,
Mm.
somebody with a shawl would either put one around you, or if there was none, you have to come out and go and dress properly.
Mm.
So it's though when I got married 50 years ago, we didn't marry with wedding rings. I couldn't put a ring on my
Yes, that's the thing from the Church of God of Prophecy. I remember
my church
hearing that.
thought
You
that
guys weren't allowed to wear rings.
no jewelry, um, jewelry is banned
Not
within the
even
church,
wedding rings. It's madness.
including wedding rings. And it was several years later, in the kind of development that I described to you earlier, that we just broke ranks with that. I bought my wife a wedding ring. She then bought me a ring, which I'm boldly wearing till now.
Oh.
And to be fair to the Church of God Prophecy, it has rescinded those teachings. It has, but it's a bit of a mess, because it's like, what is allowed and what is not allowed now. Well, actually, woman, wear what you want. If you
Well,
want
no.
chandeliers on your ears,
Yeah.
wear chandeliers on your ears. Moderation might teach us something about how to adorn ourselves, but that's where it should have been all along.
Mm.
That is ridiculous rules saying, yeah. And of course, some of the things that some people now in advanced age have as a big quarrel against churches like mine and one or two others, it is the way in which, when they were young, these churches treated them. You know, if they happen to get pregnant, very often you couldn't find the man. And
Mm.
somebody said no, because the man was always in the choir, right? But the woman, who of course is the one who is on whom the pregnancy will show, they had to come before the church and beg pardon for what they had done.
Mm.
And without being too explicit, for some of these young girls, very often the first time they had any sexual encounter,
Mm.
um, as some one person said once, me never even know what me I do, right?
Mm.
And but as a result of that brief experience, they become pregnant,
Mm.
and with a baby growing inside of them, right? A completely unknown world. What the church thought best to do is to bring them before the church in their state to make them apologize. And
that's right. And many were ostracized at the time that they actually needed.
Yes, at the time when they need
guidance and help.
More help and guidance is the time when they were handed over to the devil, as was said in some churches. Throw you out, turn you over to the devil. So, thank God that times have moved on. It should never have been where it was in some cases. But I think, again, I won't bore you with the details, but I have been in my own denomination at the very forefront of battling against some of those extremist teachings, which
thank you for that, Joe.
My main point was that when people say this is the Black church that is doing this, very often, and certainly in the case of the Church of God Prophecy, not a single one of those rules was written by Black people. Every one of them was written by white people in the Deep South.
Okay.
And then as these churches became part of our lives, those teachings also became part of our lives.
Okay. Well, that's very interesting. So, Bishop, tell me, have you been mentoring over the years? Whose lives have you affected?
Well, I'd like to think I have affected lots of lives, including my children's lives, for the better. I've mentored not necessarily because of my truncated pastoral life. I've not been in a local church for long enough really to say, and these have passed through my hands. So what has tended to happen more so is that I have mentored people on the move. When I left Sheffield, for example, my assistant pastor took over from me. And so I do those kind of lead-ins. And a gentleman I was talking to just a couple of days ago was reminding me, now that he's flying, he's just about to finish his PhD, actually. Now that he's flying in the world, he was reminding me that I was the person who first gave him an opportunity to present an academic theological paper. At the time, I was doing a series of meetings between Jewish rabbis and Black clergy. And so what I found during that time actually was that the Jewish rabbis, I could just call them rabbis, couldn't I? Nobody else has rabbis but Jews. What I found was that the rabbis were all incredibly well trained, whereas because of the way you become minister in the Church of God of Prophecy and in other Black churches, we don't necessarily have a parallel training scheme, right?
Yeah.
To get mine, I had to go outside to do it at a university. So I was always scratching around to find somebody who could fill those spaces to put our side. And somebody recommended me to this gentleman, and I didn't know that that was his first time, but he presented there. But although it didn't mean a great deal to me, for him personally, for him, it was absolutely the start of something that whetted his appetite for. And he's gone on to do an enormous amount of things. But that and many others. I talked to people. One gentleman I spoke to again recently saying to me that he was hearing about some health issues that I and my wife were having, and he said, "No, you two are the model couple. Nothing can happen to you," he said. And then he went on to say, "I still remember when I was having a difficult time, how you reached out to me and really helped me." Now, I don't even remember reaching out to him, but that's a memory that he has. So yes, I have tried to be generous. Just finally, let me say, I've had a huge amount of generosity extended towards me in my working life and in my life in general, a huge amount. And I feel that I started with very little. And if it had not been for the generosity of people around me, I just would not have achieved hardly anything in life. And as a consequence, I'm very, very free with my generosity towards others. If I can help in any way, I try to do so.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you for the writings that you used to do in The Voice, because I used to see that over the years,
Yes.
So
I was an agony uncle for a time.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
Yes,
Oh,
as well as write. I mean, if I continued doing it, they would still, I mean, no, The Voice doesn't have a space now, but Marcia with with Keep the Faith, the Gleaner often asks me to write, especially like at Christmas time or Easter times. For the last couple of years, I've not taken them up on it. I probably would do now. And with the BBC, as I said, I've for the last 20 odd years, I've been part of the daily service team.
Is this on Radio 4?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, Radio 4. The daily service on Radio 4 every day, apart from Saturdays and Sundays.
Okay.
Every day there's a service from 9:30 till 9:45 till for 15 minutes.
Yeah.
So I've been one of the people who present that.
Wow.
There's lots. I mean, there's like 300 of them a year, so there's a lot of people involved. I do maybe 3, 4, 5 a year only, and I've got one coming up, as I said, on the 19th. But those are all scripted. The BBC don't allow those services to have any ad lib. It has to be.
They don't want any surprises. They don't want you getting too militant.
Absolutely. So you have to try and squeeze in things that will pass the test. And so everything you write has to be seen by the editor.
Wow.
And I've had some scripts almost wholly ripped up. Start again. But mostly, I mean, the last one I sent, for example, my editor simply said, "It's a good script, just record it for me."
Fantastic.
So that's very good. Yeah.
I think it would be good for us to look at what churches are doing now, highlight those positive things.
And there is much.
And we can maybe have another conversation around that. To showcase best practice, because I started writing a book about the ideal church. Like you, I write books too.
You've written an incredible number. I think I read that in your resume somewhere. How many books have you written?
20.
Yeah. I mean, I have to admit, I have not discovered your work yet, so I will.
That's fine. But I feel that the church is really a fascinating enigma in terms of the people who are in it, its history, and also its effect. And I think it has a lot of power to help change things within the Black community for the better. I really do think it has. I mean, some of the churches have massive buildings and they're either doing fantastically well with those buildings, running community projects, helping young people. And yet there are other churches who the building's really just a waste. They're not doing anything with it during the week. So I think we need to look at that and see how we can mobilize positive change and raise the profile of the Black church.
Well, listen, as I said, and if people read the books I've written, in my last book that I mentioned a while ago, Flourishing in Babylon, I actually make the point that the Black churches show a way in which you can flourish in this here Babylon.
Fantastic.
Right? So there's no doubt more can be done. But I say to folks, though, very often if we talk about politics or we talk about social action, and so on, what we seem to believe is that it must come from the top of the church, the pastor.
Not necessarily.
That's not the way church works.
Yes.
It really is not. A pastor has a particular role, which is one I walked away from, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Because it does keep you in a certain restricted vein, mostly. I mean, there are one or two pastors over the years who, Martin Luther King is a classic example of a pastor who blossomed out in the wider world. But mostly when they do that, other people have to be running the church because, you really can't do both things. But the churches that succeed in doing more than just being a worshiping community, important as that is where individual people within those congregations find their vocation and root it in those churches, right? So if I go to a local church, I'm not looking saying, well, why isn't the pastor thinking about a breakfast club? Or why can't we do this? Or why can't we do that? Well, I say to those people with those ideas, that's the good Lord speaking to you about something that you should lead. Don't fob it off onto the pastor and say, why isn't the pastor appointing somebody to do this? God appoints you. Get up and do the stuff that's in your heart to do. And as you do it, the church is doing it because you are the church.
Yes.
We need more of that kind of autonomous movement within churches with deep respect for leadership. But, you can see something that needs doing, then do it.
Yeah. Well, let me mention some of the positive things that I know some churches are doing. They're having a counseling service, a free telephone counseling service. Some are running senior citizens' homes. Some are running care homes. Some are running children's clubs, youth clubs. They're also doing outreach to gangs. Some are running Saturday schools. Some are running singles ministry. As we know, we've heard that a number of women in the church are single. And there is an issue in terms of a Black woman within a church wanting to marry another Black man or whatever color man within the church. And that's not always forthcoming because the ratio might be 8-1 in terms of, 8 women to 1 eligible man. And it's not good, is it? And then we also have women's ministries. We also have men's ministries. We have also where people are providing hampers for the local community, especially around Christmas, which is absolutely wonderful. They also have coffee clubs. You mentioned about breakfast clubs. So those are some of the great things which are going on.
There's a lot going on, which is why I said earlier, the Black church isn't the sleeping giant that we think it is. The Black church is actually doing a whole heap of work.
Well, maybe they need to get their marketing up then so that we all know.
I know, but if you're a small church doing work in community, marketing isn't necessarily top of your priority list. Marcia Dixon, with her PR work, has been trying for 30 years or more to encourage churches to report the things that they do. But as she will tell you, to get any news out of these churches, you have to go hunt it down yourself. It doesn't actually flow. I mentioned that the National Church Leaders Forum, we do a quarterly newsletter. To get any news items in it, you'd think that people would see it and say, oh, yes, let me send that. We've just done a baptism or we've just done a project, with young people. Let's take some pictures, send it in. But they don't seem to be natural purveyors of getting their news out there. They sometimes you can see some of it on social media. And I think we are getting better. But I want to encourage really a sense of living in the space in creative ways. That's what I'm encouraging. So again, if somebody's in a congregation and there's nobody there getting news out, get your camera out, get your iPhone out, do little pieces, send it, put it online, or send it into Marcia and to NCLF, and can it get into your newsletter or can it get into your magazine, and so on.
Fantastic. All right, then. I think that we'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much, Bishop Aldred.
Very happy to talk to you.
A treasure, and I thank you for your work over the years. You have been tremendous, and it sounds like you're going to continue to be a shining beacon for another 20 or 30 years, perhaps.
I know that death will come one day, but it's going to have to catch me on the move.
Yeah, plenty you have to do before then. So you're right. It's going to...
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you for having me on your program.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for agreeing to do this interview. Take care.
Thank you.